Chris Marion, and you're listening to the Queen Bee Sessions, conversations with Wisconsin women in conservation. We're here to tell stories about all the great work being done to protect soil, water, and wildlife by Wisconsin women. We hope these stories will encourage you in your own efforts to nurture land and yourself. It's March and it's Women's History Month, so today it's super appropriate and my great pleasure to be talking with history maker VanDuvall, my good friend and partner in crime, partner in the Wisconsin Women in Conservation Project, and her talented daughter, Ife Olatunji, a filmmaker and visual anthropologist. Welcome, ladies. Where are you all at today?
Hi, Chris. We're great. How are you?
Where are you guys coming from? I know where you're at, but let's put everybody in context. Where are you today?
Ife, you start. Where are we?
Okay, we are in the great state of California.
More specifically, Los Angeles, just a few miles from the LAX airport. So if you hear a jet going over, there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, I'm at the farm in Southwest Wisconsin. So if you hear a rooster go by, just ignore that guy.
And I'll just say I'm still a Wisconsin resident. And so I'm just out here spending a little time with my daughter.
I am a California resident, but I love Wisconsin.
Well, I think we're going to kind of like traverse the world today in this interview because you all have wide-ranging interests and experiences. But I am so delighted to meet you, Ife. I've heard so much about you. Your mom is so proud of you. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking the way your history with each other and your future and your roots in various different states and nations really is playing out in your work today. Well, Una, I'm going to introduce you first. Una is an artist and an activist with deep roots in Milwaukee. I know her as a community organizer, but she's also a nonprofit manager and she does strategic planning consulting with folks. She serves on the board of several ag and local food organizations, including the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute and the Wallace Center. In a previous phase of her life, Una worked in Milwaukee city government. And now Wisconsin Women in Conservation is really blessed to have Una as a community liaison to all of the great folks who are doing urban farming in and around Milwaukee. And you should hear her sing. We're not going to do that today, but boy, we should do that on another podcast.
I'll send you a link.
Ife is also an artist and an activist, and you have your own business called Freedom Films, and you practice something called ethnographic documentation through film and photography, and your work is really beautiful. I loved exploring it, and you all can check her out at Freedom Films. I think it's
Freedom Lover Films, because in real life there's a little heart in there, but Freedom Lover Films, yeah.
So great. Okay, so that's the address, and you have a podcast too, South of Hollywood.
Yep. South of Hollywood. I think it's southofhollywoodpodcast.com. Yeah.
I know that. I mean, if we just get started, it'll all show up on our phones. Yeah. We don't even know what any addresses are anymore.
Yeah.
Well, you both have roots in LA.
Yeah.
You have connections all over the world, but I know you also have a really powerful history as a Kansas farm family. And you've got deep roots, still living roots in the town of Nicodemus, which is a frontier community, right? Established by African Americans way back at the end of the Civil War. It still survives today.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about Nicodemus? I mean,
sure.
Could go in a lot of directions, but I'm super fascinated with the history of this place.
Well, we're really humbled and honored to be descendants from Nicodemus. My great-great-grandmother were part of the settlers that settled there, and I think it was 1865. My history is fuzzy, but I'll say this. You can find it because you can go to the Smithsonian Museum, and we have a marker there. And then we're part of the National Park Service, so you can find us there. And anything in Kansas, you're going to find us. But 150 years, my family and we're pretty all families. There's several different families that's still there. We still have active farms. I found out recently I'm a NOLO. That's a non-operating landowner, which we still have a number. I'm a NOLO. We still have an active wheat farm and still have minimal rights to our oil in Nicodemus. And we get to participate as descendants because we have established a limited liability corporation that produces our annual homecoming, which brings together over 2,000 residents, descendants every year that come back to the little town, which is it's a settlement really, but we come back together, we reconnect as family, as extended family, as friends, and anybody can come, Chris. And we just make sure that the history, this part of Americana history, is not forgotten. We hear a lot about slavery, then we hear a lot about the civil rights movement. But keep in mind that between that 75 to 150 years, there was a lot of Black farmers, Black pioneers. Nicodemus is also hails to be home of the Buffalo Soldier. So we are just wanting to make sure that that part of the American Black experience, the migration, doesn't get forgotten. And so we do that in Demas as a tribute to our ancestors. And then Ife and I are part of the second wave of migration when they left the farm and came to the cities. So in the 20s and the 30s, my parents came to California, set up a business, and we'll talk about that too. And so all of that is a continuous thread. We're Americans. We brought that history, and we don't rest in the fact that it was just slavery. So I think that you can Google us, you can look up Nicodemus. There's so much has been written and said about Nicodemus for the Plains region. We have a fantastic historical society. We have a Black Farmers Association. There's an educational, Verl Schweitzer and Gail Sayers hail from there. Everybody knows Verl Schweitzer was Green Bay because he was one of the first Black Green Bay Packers in the 50s. So we touch on a lot of things that go on throughout the country, but we're really very honored and proud. And I tell you, it is sacred work that we're doing with Homecoming, the Historical Society, and the Black Farmers Association. So we're really happy to do it as the next group of kids.
Well, I was amazed at how much information there was online, and the national parks have some great old articles and history and beautiful photos, and then events today happening around conservation, which
yes,
I thought it was really beautiful to see that there were conservation events, and there's a camp, and there were kids, and they were learning about farming and soil conservation.
Animal husbandry, all of that. And all of that is promoted during Homecoming. You got to know where your food comes from. You have to understand how important it is to take care of the land. That was ingrained in all of us. We don't even get away from it.
Well, it makes a lot of sense that you ended up doing what you're doing in Milwaukee, but I just didn't realize how deep the roots went. It looks like 2023 is going to be the 145th Emancipation Celebration.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
July, the end of July. It's on our website, nicodemushomecoming.org. I just recommend people, if you can't come, read about it. You know, what happened to us, and this is how it really took off. During 2019, for 143 years, it had been everybody come. And of course, the pandemic didn't allow that.
Right.
And everybody who had been on the committee, we were at that point an association. It was just a group of neighbors and, well, actually family and cousins coming together and trying to figure it out. And in fact, it was my sister-in-law who said, oh no, we're going to have homecoming. We're just going to do it online. And we got busy and figured out how to reach people all over the country and get them online. It was the cutest thing ever because a lot of our relatives are in their 80s. And can you imagine getting them to be online to have homecoming? So we brought up the music. We had everybody do pictures and videos. We just got everyone together and we did it for 3 days.
Wow.
So we started off showing films from everybody's family things. We used some of the Park Service stuff. If you haven't heard the poem, Old Nicodemus, I recommend that you find that poem because it really encapsulates what we're doing. By the third day, everybody was so excited about just having to be together. we generally raised about $10,000 in an hour and fixed one of the buildings in Nicodemus. This was an incredible motion. So with that, we decided, okay, so now we do a blended. So we're going to have always a little bit of internet and then people on the township site, because we realize now that some of the seniors can't travel. Some of them don't want to travel. And so we always make sure now that there's a little nod to the internet. But we did it. And we did it with very little money, just plain old, what we say, the Nicodemus spirit, and made it happen. Right, Ife? Because Ife helped a lot with making sure that we got it done.
I helped a little bit. Yeah.
Well, can you, Ife, do you have memories of the home farm or of the celebration? What are your memories of
Kansas? Well, like you said, I was born in LA and I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I only got to visit, I think maybe once or twice as a little kid. And my memories were definitely of just like basically the open prairie. We have like a central park where everything actually happens in. And back in the day, before the park service was a part of it, it was just an open field, with wild grass and stuff. So there was always June bugs or lightning bugs. And that's my favorite thing that I remember about being out there. There were just these lightning bugs flickering everywhere. And I grew up in the city, so I never really was into lightning bugs like that. And out there, it was just like, in African-American culture, we really have a tradition of like sending our kids down south to like go be on the farm in the summertime and stuff. And so that was my farm, was being out west in the prairie and with my cousins and stuff running across the street. And that's the other thing. We were like totally unsupervised. And I remember that being a lot of fun, because we were out in the prairie. So there's nothing to do, it's not like there's anywhere to go, so they just let the kids run free. And I just remember thinking like, oh, this is awesome. Like you can just cross the streets by yourself and walk around and get food. And like I said, at the time we would just barbecue. It wasn't like, vendors. It was just people cooking and, drinking out in the park. I think we had one lamp. We had one
light post.
One light post over like basketball court area. Yeah. And that was like, so after the kids stopped playing basketball, I just remember that was where all the elders and parents sat down and played cards and laughed all night and played music. And it was just really organic. So now we got that a little bit more, structured. And it's kind of, compartmentalized. There's little spaces for everything. And like I said, now we have vendors and a lot more people, though, are coming back, I guess, because we have more amenities. So it's really nice to see it grow. It's really nice to see people from outside of our community that aren't necessarily even in our family still come and participate. A lot of people from Kansas come. So that's why I'm like, you see people, even though they don't live in Nicodemus, you still see people, and family and stuff that are in the area. So it's really great. I don't know. Those are my memories of just being there with my family, hanging out in the grass. And that's the main thing I remember.
Yeah, what a big difference from LA, where you probably can't have to be supervised, to
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, what about your memories?
Oh my God. Well, again, I didn't realize that was when you pile everybody in a Chevy and drive for 3 days. When I was a little kid, that was the way it went. There was 5 of us and my mom and dad. So the fact that my father during the 60s and the 50s would pile us in that car, 5 little kids in the back seat, and drive us from California to Kansas, because that was what it took to get us there. And then we would get there and, my grandfather would make you feed the pigs and feed the chickens, because we didn't really know how to really farm. So he made sure we understood where our food came from and how you had to take care of everything. So we might stay down there a little while. My parents were not the ones to drop you off. Good. You were going to be there with them and they were going to make sure you understood what was going on. So as a kid, that's what we did. We took care of feeding the chickens and doing the little chores that we could do down there and plant what we could plant and again, talk about this land and why it was so important for our family not to just walk away from it. Right. And even though, because a lot of families just kind of threw in the towel, they gave up. I can remember my father, when he wasn't in Demas, making sure that if he could help people that needed help, or pay taxes, or someone was sick and couldn't farm, he would make sure that they had the resources to do that. And that even continues to this day. We still have a cooperative, the family, our cousins. And so we would do that. That was his contribution, even if he was up here in California. And he went so far as to even start a little group of his cousins that had migrated called Nicodemus West. And they bought businesses and they would do all kinds of things. They had lawn services. They had laundromats here in California. So they brought that same thing. So the one thing that sticks out the most in my mind about Nicodemus is that you could just do anything. So the year that I learned to drive, I was about 15 and I had my driver's permit. And we were in Demas for the summer. And my father and my uncle Verdell, who I love dearly, he's passed on, both my dad and my uncle passed on. They said, okay, sis, everybody's name was sister. They said, okay, sis, you're going to let you drive. You just get in the car and we're going to get in there and you're going to drive us all over Demas. Now, Demas is about 1.5 miles in any direction, but I got a learner's permit. She talked about being able to run around. I was able to drive. So now I get in the car, I'm able to drive. I'm so proud of myself because I'm driving around Demas in the car like a big grown up. My dad and my uncle started shooting pheasants out the window. So they start hunting as we drive around the prairie. They didn't tell me they brought their guns. And they said, now, when you hear a car backfire, you'll be fine. And it was like, so it was the Wild West. And all of my family are cowboys. And that's one of the, as a teenager, that kind of stuck with me. So, but we, again, having the ability to do that and just be open and not be afraid of things, I think was good counsel. And you just got to love the fact that they had a very rural mentality, no matter where they were. So the other one about being back in California, I wanted to grow flowers. I was like, Dad, we need to grow flowers. And he said, no, you don't need to grow flowers. He said, you need to grow some vegetables. So in my front yard. And I was like, no, I want to grow flowers. So we compromised and I grew strawberries. Oh. Because strawberries were flowers and then you could eat them. So that's the kind of, no matter where we were, that was the kind of thinking that went on in my family. And this is why I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Because I don't really know anything else. I'm educated. I have a degree in fine art, but that grounding in what you do and what you eat is who you are never leaves my consciousness.
Yeah. Well, land is grounding, right? Even you, Ife, I mean, you weren't there that much, but you maintain a connection and you feel the heartbeat of your history back there. And I think it's interesting that we're talking about this sort of rural and land-based cowboy pioneering spirit and keeping that tradition alive and valuing hard work and valuing growing food. And you've both gone in different directions, but your activists and your activism seems really rooted in your history. I mean, Ife, I loved looking at your documentary work about women all over the world. I feel a kindred spirit with you because I'm trying to document the stories of women who are farming and taking care of land. And it's shocking how in America and around the world, we're still not really seeing women's stories. We're still behind. So tell me how you got into what you're doing. That's kind of an unusual emphasis. Tell me about that. It's really beautiful.
Oh. Well, I mean, to that note, I mean, I'm a woman, so it's not unusual to me. But well, just in connection to like what we're talking about, I mean, it definitely started with my family. My father is a filmmaker, so I mean, I got a lot of interest from him. But my grandfather, my mom's father, who's from Nicodemus, he was a historian. So we had family photo albums, and we would sit and look at pictures and talk about people and tell stories. So I think that my first initial love, for history and culture and family, it came from my family, but it came from photographs, and it came from looking at, what happened when they migrated, what it looked like back in Kansas, what it looked like maybe before Kansas, So yeah, I definitely started there. And then naturally, you want to know what those people went through. And that is what made me want to study history. So I actually have a minor in African American history as well. Mostly from 1860 to 1960. But again, like my mom says, I'm a really big advocate for the history of Reconstruction and the Great Migration, because that is a history that it's not really publicly promoted the way that the civil rights and the Civil War is. So, and I'm also an advocate for stories about the end of slavery and how slavery ended on a practical, in a reality. So for instance, we celebrate June 19th in the African American culture as our emancipation from the United States of slavery. I don't know how else to say it. That's how it was.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah. And so, that's a history that's not really delved into. It's always kind of summed up as there was a civil war, there was a proclamation, and that was the end of slavery. But, there was a 2-year period where people were denied the right to leave slavery. So there's just a lot of stories there. And of course, it actually ended up being, I believe it was Buffalo Soldiers, or part of the Union Army that was still remaining, that included Black people that went and informed, the other states. Yeah. And then our neighborhood, like Nicodemus, like we're saying, it's only one of, I think it's like 5 remaining Black settlements in America. So there's a history there of what happened to the Black settlements. How did we lose the Black settlements? Where did those people go? And I was always interested in that. I always wanted to explore that. So yeah, that took me through high school and college. I was just telling my mom the other day, I was like, I didn't learn anything in high school and college. I was constantly fighting with my history teachers because I was like, that's incorrect. That's not right. And I was in high school, so I really had no idea what I was talking about, but I knew they were wrong. And I knew their interpretation of African American history was wrong. And I stood on that, with no degree. I was like, no, that's not how African American history went. And I just was so sure of myself. So, I said, well, I'm going to get a history degree because, no one's ever going to tell me that I don't know Black history. And I remember I even had a friend who was like, I've been to Africa. You never been to Africa? And I was like, oh, that's never going to happen again. I'm going to Africa. Like, I just refused to have anybody tell me they knew more about Black history or African American history than I did. So yeah, I got really interested in that. I studied anthropology, and the same thing. I had a love of photography and everything. And so I actually went to my advisor and I showed her my photographs and I said, I actually want to work for National Geographic. That's my goal. How do I get there? What do you suggest? And she was like, oh, we should get you in the art school so that you can actually study photography. And so, yeah. And so I went into photography, and then in the art school, of course, they introduced filmmaking. And so then I got into filmmaking, and it was just a natural progression. I love documentary. And so from that, I wanted to tell stories about women. And I just always wanted to tell the stories of girls and women. And I guess, like I said, number one, it was because I didn't see anyone like me having their story told. And that's in the 90s and the 2000s, that's like very recent. And there still weren't enough stories about Black women. There certainly weren't any stories about young Black women, because there is also a kind of an age barrier. So it's like older Black women were respected, you know, like, I want to say like, what was the poet? Maya Angelou, you know, like there was like this certain reverence for like older Black women. And to some extent, I would argue that it was because they weren't in a position of power. And so they could be revered. Well, whereas young women, we were coming into our power and we were very like, no, this is some bullshit. Like, we need to change the world. Like, we don't like this gender discrimination, these barriers. We want to be able to do all things. And we just never knew a different world, you know? So I wanted to share those stories. I wanted to share my friends and my girlfriends from all over the world, you know, in college and high school that I met that had these amazing, incredible stories, that did whatever it is they wanted to do, because I also knew that that was an anomaly for history. So that's how I got into telling women's stories. And of course, that made me want to travel. So, you know, once I started, you know, documenting my friends, of course, I mean, I was in anthropology, so I was studying it. But once I was really comfortable documenting my friends, I felt like I had an interest. You know, I didn't necessarily have a style or a technique just yet, but I had an interest. And so I took a graduate level course when I was an undergraduate to actually go and do field work in Brazil. And so when I went to Brazil, we spent 2 weeks in Brazil, and it was just really life-changing. And it exposed to me something I hadn't thought about. You know, of course, it was like in the class while I was studying before we actually went, but it was just the idea that there were Black and Indigenous people around the world, which I know that sounds naive now, but no one ever had showed that to us. You know, we thought that what was happening to Black people was only happening to Black people in America. And to learn about Brazil and the history of Brazil, the history of slavery in Brazil, the history of emancipation in Brazil, and the history of integration there. And then to go there and learn about religion and culture and food. They also have the largest Black African population outside of West Africa in the world. So this is a space that no one had ever described that to me. You know, Brazil had always been presented as very monolithic, but it was very diverse. And so once I got there, I naturally wanted to interview women and interview them. There were Black women, there were trans women, there were, and this was years ago. That's why I'm like, this was all very eye-opening in 2005, you know, when I was like 20 years old. So yeah, so I started filming that. I photographed religious ceremonies. I interviewed some women priestess there. Like I said, I interviewed sex workers. I just really was like, oh, there's a whole plethora of things that women are experiencing and doing around the world. So that started my interest in international documentation of women's lives. And so, you know, I was still operating on I still am. I am very independent. I still operate on the shoestring budget. I really just do it out of my love and desire. But of course, I personally was practicing. You know, I wanted to develop my skills in ethnography and anthropology and documentary filmmaking. And so I continued to further that by going to graduate school at the University of Manchester. And then I worked with women and girls in England and Manchester. And, you know, again, I was thinking about the developing world, because in anthropology, they always focus on the developing world and, you know, indigenous communities and rural communities and people in, you know, far off distant lands. And when I was in England, it made me think, what about women who live in cities and have jobs and aren't married and with kids? What about their stories? Why aren't those stories considered? So then I really wanted to study more about gender, not just women, but what is this construct of gender? What does it say about us, the society, about our biology, our genetics? So I got into more of all of that stuff. And then, of course, with genetics, again, brought me back to being Black. And what does it mean to be Black? Is it genetic? Is it cultural? Is it biological? Is it social? And my own desire to go to Nigeria and study my own DNA and meet women in Nigeria and film their stories. And in this case, I filmed their performances, their dances, their music, their costumes, their hair, their makeup, as representations or performances of culture, So yeah, so that's been the main thing. It's taking me all over, and I still study women, of course. Now I make feature films, and women are obviously not my only subject, but we are very, I guess we're half. We have half women and half men in our crew, but we're very women dominated. It's a very woman dominated documentary department. So we're definitely doing that.
Can you talk about who you're working with? Can you say their name? Will you talk?
No, I don't need to say their names, but they work at Participant, and they're wonderful people, and it's a lot of women, and there's a lot of women for a production company. It's just a lot of women, and so I think it lends itself to more. We're very big on impact. We're very big on outreach. We're very big on community screenings, and I think those things stem from feminine energy. So yeah.
Thank you.
I love that. It strikes me how much like your mom you are, even though you're in a different state most of the time, you're in a very different line of work, but you're both really busy women. You are into impact. I heard you say impact, and I would say that Una, I think of you as someone who has impacted so many realms. The more I get to know your mom, Ife, the more I'm like, my gosh, this story just keeps going, which is like your story. You guys are very curious, you're very committed, and you're very much motivated by a desire to make things better.
Yeah.
How did you pass all this on? I mean, you're feeling pretty proud right now.
No, so let me just say that my mom used to say, your kids don't listen to what you say, they listen to what you do. And I think that that's it. She grew up in a house where this was common. These discussions, Sunday dinner around our table was, what are we doing to make the community better? What are we doing to make the family better? What are we doing to make Demas better? What are we doing to make LA better? Wherever we were, the conversation is, what are you doing? Right? And it was to give you a value added. In Ife's case, beyond my wildest dreams, she decided to take it internationally. She decided to go and do anthropology. I can remember the high school conversation with the guidance counselor when we talked about, how do you pick a career? And that particular guidance counselor said, well, you find something that you love to do and then find a way to make that into a living. So Ife liked to travel, eat, and dance. And it's real simple. At high school, she liked to travel, eat, dance. But what she did was add the science with the anthropology. See, I wasn't that smart. Mine is a little disjointed, right? I'm a singer over here and an activist over here. What she's been able to do is integrate it. And I'm learning from her how to integrate it. Everything that we do, we're learning better. So I'm proud because she absolutely is living out my dream, right? You just make it happen all over the world. And I get to go. She drags me around sometimes to these different countries. And so there we go. I tell her she got to get another partner, because I'm tired of bumping around on planes. And, my idea of glamping is not, no bathrooms for 10 days out in the bush someplace. So that's not what I want to do anymore. But I have to, you can see why I'm absolutely over the moon and proud of her. And I think that it's a really good thing when you know that you've instilled that in someone, but it really is not what I said. It's what she's seen in my family and in the household, and what I continue to model as long as there's breath in my body, you should be somewhere activating something. And if you find something that you don't like, then don't complain about it. Get busy. Figure out a way to have some type of influence, or even support someone that you think can help. If you can't be the one, don't begrudge someone else's their support.
Wow.
That's it.
I think that's beautiful. Well, Ife, when I was watching your podcast, you were talking about movies and culture, And one of the shows I've really enjoyed a lot in the past year is Reservation Dogs.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you're watching that. I'm really excited that we're going to have another season. But what I love about that is you have these teenagers who are so excited to get off the reservation. Native kids from Oklahoma, they want to go to California. And there's a spirit that appears to the one young man, and it's always sort of teasing him about, oh, well, you're ready to go because you've made your community better and you've accomplished everything you needed to do here. And it's a real challenge to, the selfishness of our culture, where we're not so much rooted in how do we make things better for the community. And we're not really sure who our community is anymore. And I think what's so beautiful about your family's story is that community. Your grandpa and your dad, they grew up with a care for this very special place, even though they weren't living there. And I think, the work you're doing in Milwaukee, there are multiple communities that are tight and have formed around Alice's Garden and other community gardens and other food shed type. And it's the community that is strong there that makes the dream work, that makes change happen in circumstances that seem kind of forbidding.
I think thank you for saying that, because Walnut Way, I got to talk about Walnut Way, and we've got this and the River Works and River West groups that we're all part of. I think the thing that we like to forget maybe is that whatever people say about the neighborhoods, I'm sitting in South Central at this moment, and I think that people have a miscommunication about labeling. Right? There are good people who live everywhere. Mm-hmm. And everybody, no matter where they live, wants the same for their families. Mm-hmm. We like to label things because we don't take the time to dig in, delve in, and meet who's there and really see. Like, we've got the best neighbors here. Ife, I tell you, we can walk like 3 steps and pull all the avocados we want off our neighbor's tree. We got a neighbor 2 doors down that they don't cut their grass. Their turtles eat the grass. This is the city. Now, isn't that conservation?
Yes.
We have an orange tree. We have a lemon tree.
Well, I grow food. I do grow food. She grows all the herbs and spices and stuff. And right here in town. And so there's a little bit of that in everybody. And I think that the more we do that, the less we'll be so quick to label. Do we have crime statistics? Yes, but we know that crime statistics are cherry picked. I mean, there's crime everywhere. There's people, things are happening everywhere. We were on an island this weekend and we talked about, well, where's the hospital? She said it's somewhere because somebody's falling down, somebody's getting shot at, somebody's getting something on a little tiny rock. But the reality is we're humans. Mm-hmm. And that's where we all cross the same ethos. So the fact that you can label Beverly Hills or Santa Monica or something, or even the lakefront or Madison and the governor's mansion one thing, and people who live in public housing something else, is garbage. Because a life is spending 24 hours every day, no matter where, this class, caste, and race is technically garbage, but it helps us to maybe make we feel some kind of way about it. And once you shake off some of that, you can get to the essence of who people really are. And I actually think that we give a lot of reward for who has the most money or who we think has the most money. And look at where that's brought us. Right. Because that's not real. We hear a lot of people say cash is king, and Ife and I really laugh at that, because really that is, what do we call it? A false flag about how you measure something.
Yeah.
Women used to put a lot of stock in who they married. Mm-hmm. They didn't care they were unhappy.
Right.
It was all resource preservation. And I'm glad we're starting to shake that off, because you need happy. You need people who are joyful. You need, as we talked about this weekend, you need to create happy memories so that as life goes, you're not left with a bunch of unhappy memories
Right.
in the life that you lead. So I'm encouraging anybody who hears this, love yourself enough to put yourself first
Mm.
and then help others. I always used to tell women, I've been flying since I was about 13 or 14, not just to California, but I always had these jobs that had me in the air. And remember, always, they tell you, put the life jacket on yourself first.
Wow.
If you don't take anything away from this podcast, remember to put yourself first, not selfishly, but in the act of helping others, because you need to be able to be strong enough yourself to help others. I can do what I do because it doesn't cost me anything. Because if I have a skill that I can share, I share it.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't fight with you to make it better. We are doing, first of all, you can't talk about Alice's Garden without talking about the incredible work that came before me with Venus Williams and all the work that she did with Sharon's last name, and from Walnut Way, Adams, Ife, Sharon Adams, and all the people in Milwaukee that we grew up with. I mean, Ife worked for Walnut Way, or was it the Fondy Market?
I worked technically for AmeriCorps, but it was at Walnut Way, and one of my projects was Fondy Food Market.
Oh, wow. Full circle.
Yeah. I very much got on Sharon's nerves, but she loved me. And, yes. And I did a lot of things, including take a tour around Wisconsin with AmeriCorps and talk about service learning. And the idea of service learning being that you actually take what you theoretically learn in the classroom and actually apply it in a real life situation or scenario. So that now seems a little bit more like, oh yeah, of course. But again, 15 years ago, the idea of service learning coming into the classroom and being integrated at a university level was like literally groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And Sharon had been the manager or head of service learning, I think, for several years. So yeah, when I got there, the office was actually in transition, and we started off with a lot of art and cultural practices. So of course, working in the film department and the English department and stuff like that. But then I think the second half of the year, we were really like, oh, it's springtime. We have this garden situation. And of course, Sharon is she created Walnut Way. So she always had a partnership between service learning and Walnut Way. And once I went over there, I just like fell in love with it. So I was like a board member. I was a volunteer. Like I said, I helped do marketing. I made videos. I did literally anything that I could contribute at Walnut Way. Yeah.
So, and let me say that you will hear Walnut Way now, which is run by an incredible young man by Tony. But Sharon's daughter and her husband created the Sherman Phoenix.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not unique in what happens when the family is cohesive and passes those values on.
Right.
This is how communities survive and grow. No different than the Wrigley family.
That's right. Right.
No different.
And the community that is formed around those efforts is what gives people a foundation for going out into the world and having impact. And I think, the collected stories of all of those neighborhoods. I mean, I lived in Chicago for 20 years, so I appreciate the neighborhood mentality, which is really different from a rural mentality. Now I live rurally and I really love that too. But the neighborhood mentality is something very special and very, very tight. I think of block parties. My daughter now lives in Sherman Park on Grant Boulevard, and they're starting block parties and building their own history, right? Everybody together is creating a shared history, even though that neighborhood's been through multiple changes. What do you think is the value of we're back in the local food world, right? We're talking about seminal experiences that happen around taking care of community plots, taking care of Kansas farmland. What is the value of the local food system?
Well, the value is people being aware of it, where they don't just take it for granted. The meat does not come out of a styrofoam container at the supermarket. There is a beef producer back there. Now, I think it's being an informed consumer. If you are starting to look at where this food really comes from, you learn to have an appreciation from who's producing it. You take very good care. You don't waste as much. Right. You start to have a heightened sense of value and appreciation for the food that you have. I mean, we call each other foodies because we're more concerned about what went into the grain, what pesticides are being used, where's the runoff, how are we taking care of our land? And I think that this work in conservation starts to, particularly from the urban ag perspective, it doesn't give the people who are not directly farming a pass at ignoring what's happening to our environment.
Wow.
The more we talk about, this is where, we talk about Robert a lot in Wisconsin with what he does with the farmers markets.
Robert Pierce, because he's a rock star and he makes it happen, and he's bringing people to the farm, and he's also creating opportunities for young people to get in touch with the farm. We've got studies that prove the more you're in touch with land, the happier you are. So the value for me is having people wake up to what's happening with their food and not simply just eat and forget about it, right? It really has to start to be resonating with us that we're really all on this planet together, and what we do matters to the next person as well. Ife, did you have a comment?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, I grow food, and it's been a really great learning process, and it helps with mental health and physical activity. And so I just look at, I wouldn't say I'm a farmer, but let's say farming as a full circle activity in and of itself, because it, like I said, it's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual. I feel a deep connection to the soil, the earth, as well as my ancestors. Literally every time I'm out there, I'm like, oh my God, my ancestors did the same thing. And my grandfather did the same thing right here. My grandfather and grandmother and my mom and my uncles and my aunt, they grew food right here too. So there's a deep connection with that. And I'm a Pisces, like I said, my birthday just passed. So I'm a water sign, and water is this really powerful, life-giving force, but it can also carve out mountains. So I just think of, the elements as being so important to our existence, not just because they supply us with things, but because we will return to this earth as well. And so what we grow, what we put in ourselves will go back into the earth. And so I think of that as just a complete cycle. And, I wouldn't know that if I didn't have the opportunity to put my hands in the dirt, to sweat, picking out weeds and hoeing the land. Now, luckily I have gardener to help, but still, I get out there and turn over the soil in my compost bin. And even that, like I waste nothing. I put everything in the compost bin. If there's some food looking a little funny, it's getting juiced, it's getting jammed, it's getting pickled, it's getting frozen, I'm preserving. I try my best. I also think it keeps a balanced diet, because I'm not a vegetarian, but I have been a vegetarian in my life. And again, being able to go get lettuce out of my yard, spinach out of my yard, beets out of my yard, onion, garlic, parsley, kale, I've grown all those things. And I'm always like, oh, when the apocalypse come, I got food. I'm growing food. I got a rain barrel. I'm an environmentalist. I'm a conservative. I'm a farmer. I'm a grower. I was just saying my house is full of seeds. I got seeds everywhere. I'm like, I got to throw down some seeds. We're going to get some more seeds today. Like I just, it's become a real passion. And I really encourage it. I give gifts. My gifts are seeds and plants now. I'm like, here, plant some seeds, grow some food, like, liberate yourself, literally in that order.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. Yeah. And I also, in Milwaukee, I did grow up with a commune. I grew up with a community garden. We had a community garden right on Wright Street. And, I grew up with that. So I want to always give that to kids. Oh, and I've been a volunteer with Scooter's Way. I don't know if you know, Scooter's Way is an organization that takes kids from the east side of Milwaukee to grow their own gardens and foods. That's they take awesome. Tours around schools. It's out of my elementary school, O.W. Holmes. And one of my really dear friends, Susan Schmidt, her brother Scooter, had a bar on River West. He actually had the River West bar. And he was shot and killed. And so she decided to turn her grief into working with kids in the neighborhood to learn how to do that, to grow food. And I've been a volunteer. I've taken kids to the farm. I've grown food with the farm. I've taken photos of the farm. I just love it. So it's definitely a huge part of my life. And like I said, I make films now, and those are, I feel like film is a really important way to cut through a lot of politics and a lot of, if you didn't get a chance to have a grade A education, and there's still, you should still have access to knowledge and information. So that's why I make films. And that's why I work with kids and films and kids and gardens and all that stuff, because I just feel like in our lives, as well as in real life, we have to plant seeds, we have to water our seeds, and we have to nourish our growth. So that's what I do.
Yeah. Well, that is just beautiful. Well, in my notes for this interview, I wrote down, now you guys are making me cry. I wrote down that Una is one of the most patient people I know. And if I could name one person who embodied that idea of planting the seeds, watering the seeds, showing up for the seeds, to weed them or give them water or fertilize them, whatever they need, I would say Una is that person. And wow. I want to understand what gives you hope. Una, you have such a focus on the long game. You are you've seen corruption, you've worked for cities, you've been in politics. We know that world. There's some dirty stuff in there.
Yeah.
And yet you are you're just grounded in hope. And I wonder where that comes from.
Well, I think I try, or I shouldn't say try. I live to do that because I don't like the alternative. If I thought that there was value in the cynicism, and it does have a place. I mean, you need to sometimes be a cynic and say, this is enough, and cut the cheese. But what motivates me is the higher calling and the belief that things are going to turn out okay at the end. Because in fact, if you decide that things are going to turn out okay, then you start generating the energy that makes things turn out okay. I don't have to worry about, and here's the other piece. I may or may not see the end of it.
Yeah.
Because we always want to put things in our time that this is going to happen because I need it to happen by when. And that's kind of not how life really works. I think of life as a conveyor belt. We get on it and we get to ride around how many ever times we get to ride around, then we get off of it. But that doesn't stop their conveyor belt from happening. So when you understand that, then I get out of your own head, and it's not revolving around me. It's revolving because I'm part of the revolution. I'm just part of it. Like she said, we come from the earth, we're going back to the earth. We come from a spirit, we're going back to the spirit. So I stay hopeful because I don't think that any of it is going to last forever, good or bad. It's going to constantly change. It's going to evolve. And I get like any artist or any actor, I get to have my time on stage, and then it's time for somebody else to take over. And you gotta understand that. So that's what keeps me hopeful, is that I realize that I'm not the end all be all here. And if I can leave a little nugget of positivity, then I'm good. I'm good.
I think about, again, keeping with our analogy, they're literally, seeds give me hope, because they come up through very difficult circumstances, right? Like,
right.
For instance, so I had a basil plant, and basil is not perennial, right? It doesn't come back every year, but it sends out these seeds. So when it gets distressed, it goes from female to male, which, again, people need to understand that it's very normal in nature. Okay. It goes from male to female, and then it sends out these sort of distress signals, right? It sends out these seeds that say, hey, we want to keep living. We don't want to die. We want to keep living, but our time might come to an end. So we're going to send out these seeds instead. And the seeds, they fall in the dirt. You walk on them. You don't think about them. You don't see them. You're out there in the yard. You don't know. You water it. It rains. Maybe they get flooded. Maybe they get burnt up. You don't know. And then 4 or 5 weeks later, here comes this little sprout.
Yeah.
Way out through the dirt. And it's there. It's there. It made it. It somehow had enough power and energy and force and love of the sun, right, to reach up. And that is inspiring every time. Wow. If this little bitty seed can force its way through all of these elements to rise above, literally, to rise above the shit.
Right. Right.
So can I. And the same thing, like what Mommy said, our lives have a time frame. And so we have to send out seeds. We have to send out positive energy. Things will live on beyond us. And they're not always physical. It's not always kids. I don't have any kids, but I've been a mother to thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, we're here in a time of great climate distress. We know that we are under stress, but stress in plants produces seeds. And that's exactly what you're describing. And yet there are times, it was just Aldo Leopold's week, I think we're last week. And so there was a lot about Aldo Leopold, a lot of webinars, things you could plug into. And I watched one, and the gentleman who was talking about Leopold talked about how he and his family of 5 planted all these thousands of trees up there by Baraboo, and 95% of them died. And as someone who's planted trees in a place where deer exist, I understand that. I understand what happened there.
It goes away. Yeah.
But now when you go there, it's a lush, beautiful tree-filled property. And at the time, people were wrestling with the Dust Bowl, another very catastrophic climate event in America, where, in the Depression, all the soil was lost and it was so hard to farm. And this gentleman
really suffered from that. That was a big deal in Kansas.
Oh, yes. My husband's from Missouri. Same thing. They all picked up and went to California because they couldn't survive.
That's it.
But he showed a slide that at the time that Aldo Leopold was getting interested in trees, people through the middle of the nation planted trees in this belt to try and prevent the Dust Bowl from happening again, because this dust was being taken away, and the soil. And you can literally see that there's a belt of trees that exist and did slow and change things down. People did get on board and work together to turn that bad situation around. And I think we got to live in hope that people are going to pull together today, and in all different ways, right? Whether you're the storyteller or the seed planter.
Yes, or both. So let me just touch base on WeWick for a minute, because we've talked all around the world, but let me just say how pleased I am to have landed with WeWick, because it wasn't a straight arrow. I heard about the group and do you want to try this? And I didn't feel like, I'm not a rancher in Milwaukee. You know, I'm really crazy allergic to most of it. So I'm doing all things in pots and everything. But here's the thing. When I look at the work that WeWick is doing to just give women a place to hear each other, to talk about, I'm doing natural, I'm creating I'm doing a natural habitat so that the frogs have a place, so that, you know, if we're going to do animal husbandry, it's really sensitive to the community. That is so important and empowering. Now, we can talk all about all the things that stop those things from happening, right? Women don't necessarily have access to land. They inherited it. Usually women, I always think that women got land because their husbands couldn't work it anymore for whatever reasons, but they're there. And that feminine energy has a difference about how they're going to work the land. And I think it's no accident that this time of great stress is having women emerge.
Yeah.
As people who do this work and who are vocal about doing it, just the way that Ife talks about young women having a voice. You know, you don't have to wait until you're sage to say, I have something to say. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what, hopefully when I look at her, she's comfortable enough to say what she feels today. She doesn't have to wait until she's putting me in the ground and say, okay, now I can say that what I couldn't say when mom was here. And we have to remember that all of that is what we have to be about. So WeWick has given women a platform and a connection and a support group. And I mean, just a launch pad where they can be who they are and the incredible work. We're not just June Cleaver with white pearls serving, you know, Bud or whatever his name was, dinner. We're actually growing the food. Right. You know, and we're actually taking care of the land, and we're actually making sure that the chickens and the turkeys and everything are being well cared for. Now, this is what women do, if you ask me, anyway. Right? This is just I don't know, you say feminine energy, but I don't know that that's the only way to do it, because there's a lot of men that do it, not taking anything away from them. But we're interested in taking care of the full farm, not just how much it can produce. Is the farm healthy? Is the family healthy? Is the community healthy? Those, you know, those are things that women are always first and foremost concerned about, no matter what else we're doing.
Right.
And we're doing everything.
Yeah. Well, you and I talked a little bit, you know, when we were preparing for this about the imposter syndrome, how it so holds us back from having the impact that we should and could need to have. And I think you have a pretty interesting take on that too.
Well, you know, as a connector, which is something that, you know, we're doing with another project, I felt, well, gee, I can help with this project, but I'm in a community that I'm not going to be able to sell anybody 30 acres, right? This is not going to happen in urban ag. Why am I here? And I really felt like, man, this is not a fit. And I've searched the last 18 months to find out how this works. And how this works is that we all have a connection to our food system, whether you're a grower or a consumer, whether you're a gardener, a rancher, whether you have 5 acres, 1 acre, a flower pot, or a 200-acre farm. We have got to learn to pull together, because we're all affected by this. And that is something, politics, race, gender identity, whether you present her, she, him, these things are all common to human beings. So I just hope that this is one area where we'll start to openly talk about the fact that however you come to this, and that's what I've really learned in WeWick. Women come to this at all different levels. Mm-hmm. There is no one way to be a part of this. Mm-hmm. And once we own that, we're able to share with each other. And I don't know who needs to, people are helping me, like you, to get into this and be a better person with it. And I'm hoping I'm helping someone else that can also come to the table and say, you know what, I can do this. And I see it in WeWick because, of course, you know, we were able to help young Black farmers, because UFACO and the Beulah family farm was young farmers. Great story. we were able to get them in there and support them. LaDonna with her children, making sure that she's helping those children grow. I think we're doing it. And so that helped me get over that whole imposter thing. Because if I can bring a network to people and they grow beyond what I'm able to do, then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to be able to do.
Well, farming is in some ways a contested space, right? The definition of who is a farmer, who has the right to talk about land, who has the right to own land. And one thing I love about this interview is that Ife has no bones about the fact that she's growing food. And she has a leg to stand on in this conversation. She's growing food, and that is what it comes down to. And she's taking care of her place, her space. And I think the important thing is, how can we give people the confidence and the validation that their impact on the land, on this earth, can be significant in all. There's all kind of entry points. We're all a different lever. You, Una, are a lever for change and disruption, but in such a gentle way. You mentioned being a connector. That's what you do. You connect all of your different relationships over time, connect people together. Ife is showing us what it looks like, and lifting up the stories. And I think storytelling is just, like you said, Ife, you may not have a great education, but can you enter into a story via film or listening to a podcast? Absolutely. And we need the storytellers. So I think our message, I think Una and I talked about this before we got on, is like, there's a way to help save the earth. There's a way to help save your community. There's a way to help save just one person living next to you by taking care of things in an intentional way.
Yeah. That was well said, Chris. Yeah.
Well, you guys are delightful to hang out with. I hope to do it in person sometime. Maybe I'm just going to get on a plane. I'm going to skip this seeding season and just head out there you guys were on a boat a couple days ago. That sounded amazing. Yeah. But I think maybe we can connect.
We work hard, play hard. Chris, thank you. This has been wonderful. And I got to hear Ife in a way that I don't normally get to hear her, right? That was actually cool. But let me just say to everybody, pay attention to the Queen Bee podcast. Come look at WeWig. Come just look at Freedom Lover Films and go to NicodemusHomecoming.org and really get the background story that Chris has already delved into. There's amazing things happening. And I think when we work together, there's nothing we can't do.
Thank you two so much for being my first podcast in Women's History Month. You are living history and you give me hope. So thank you so much.
Thank you.